Hello, welcome to the second episode of my podcast. My name is Ryan Gonzalez, and I'll be discussing major depressive disorder. Last time, we looked into the causes of major depressive disorder, we looked into the symptoms, and we looked into treatments. And today, we'll be looking into theories and viewpoints that different psychologists and scientists have studied into major depressive disorder and how they think different traits or different causes of this illness occur. The two that I'll be going over today are the cognitive theory of depression and also the trait theory of major depressive disorder. So to begin, I'd like to define cognitive theory. Cognition itself means the way we think, and trait is the specific trait within a person that I'm going to be looking into is personality, and how personality ties into the severity or to how someone has major depressive disorder. So the cognitive theory that I'm going to be looking into is by Aaron Beck, and it was written by Dr. Namaid. So in this article, they discuss how there is a direct relationship between the amount of someone's negative thoughts and the severity of their situation. So basically, what they're looking into is how we think and the correlation of that to major depressive disorder. So clearly they discuss in this article that the more negative thoughts one were to have, the more severe their major depressive disorder would be. For example, they gave some scenarios that a depressive person would be thinking in their head. One is, I am defective or inadequate. All of my experiences result in defeats and failures, and the future is hopeless. So these negative thoughts in this specific theory show that it could cause someone to be depressed, because when you think negatively about situations, then you kind of feel hopeless, which is one of the signs of major depressive disorder. You get very sad and you're not too happy, which is, something that I could see as a positive into seeing how cognition relates to this disorder. They also suggest that depression results from distorted thoughts and judgments, and these can be learned socially, as, for example, children in dysfunctional families or traumatic experiences or lack of experiences that would cause less development in coping skills. They also discuss in the cognitive disorder, in the cognitive theory of depression, they discuss that people think differently than people who are not depressed, and this is what causes people to be depressed. For example, people with depression tend to view themselves and their environment and their future in a negative way, causing them to misinterpret facts in negative ways. So basically, to sum up the cognitive theory of depression, it mostly goes into how negative thoughts and negative outlooks into life cause severe depression, and it causes just a downward negative trend because they feel hopeless and they feel no hope for the future. And based on the symptoms that we discussed last week or last podcast, I could see how our cognition relates to people developing depression, because if we don't learn how to cope with things and we just look at everything in a negative light and as a negative or a loss instead of as a lesson, and we don't learn that or develop that thought process, cognition, early on in life, then that could cause one to be depressed for a lifetime. Now, when we go into the personality trait theory of depression, this was an article written by Mark Dombeck. So our personality traits, according to them, occur in a 5-factor model, which was created by Costa and McRae, who researched into personality traits of major depressive disorder. These 5 are extroversion, which describes people's preferences with regard to socialization, basically how people like to communicate with other people. Agreeableness, describing how willing or unwilling people are to please others. So whether we want to make people happy or whether we don't care about making people happy or not. Consciousness, describing how seriously people take responsibilities and commitments. That's self-explanatory. Emotional stability, describing how prone to nervousness and depression people are. So basically, I would say that that's describing how people cope, how people handle certain situations. And lastly, openness to experience, describing how willing people are to try new experiences or support non-traditional agendas. So looking at all these five do relate as well to the symptoms that we discussed in the last podcast. For example, extroversion, when it comes to socialization, a lot of people who suffer from MDD, major depressive disorder, are pretty antisocial. Agreeableness, I mean, at the end of the day, I believe personally that we should all try to please ourselves, not in a bad way though, like not to harm others to get our way, but we should focus on our own mindsets and we should focus on our own happiness before we could help other people, because it's very difficult to be able to help somebody when you're not okay yourself. Consciousness, describing how seriously people take responsibilities. This one also could tie into depression, as people who suffer from major depressive disorder often have a hard time being committed to a certain thing because they feel negative about it. They feel like the situation is not going to go well for them. Emotional stability. I mean, a lot of people have breakdowns and stuff like that from being too nervous for like an exam, for example, feeling like they're gonna fail, feeling like they're not good enough for certain situations. And then lastly, openness to experience, which I feel like ties into the cognitive, because a lot of people who suffer from major depressive disorder are scared or worrisome of trying something new because they feel like it's going to be a failure. They feel like they're going to lose, and they feel like they're not going to be good enough, which is very unfortunate. But overall, I feel like both of these theories and outlooks on major depressive disorder, the cognitive and the trait theory, have a lot of pros when it comes to them. I feel like they really give good reason as to why people may have major depressive disorder and what causes the severity to increase or decrease in certain levels and experiences. And I feel like these are things that a lot of people should be looking into to help diagnose or, be there and to know when someone close to them is going through major depressive disorder. So that's going to wrap this podcast up. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something new today, and we'll be back for podcast 3.